Hello, my name is Brett Langford, 36 years old. I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, or at least I've lived there for most of my life. Greenwich is an affluent town where multi-million-dollar mansions nestle behind lush green hedges and Bentleys glide by as if they were mere bicycles. But for me, Greenwich isn't a paradise of wealth. It's a prison where I grew up in the shadow of a family that never truly saw me. I'm the eldest son in a family with two brothers. My father, Edward Langford, is a successful businessman, the founder of Langford Medical Supplies, a company that provides medical equipment to hospitals across the northeast of the United States. He's a tall man with salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp as knives, and a smile that only appears when talking about money or his youngest son, Gavin. My mother, Catherine, is a gentle but distant woman, always standing behind my father, nodding in agreement with his every decision, as if she had no opinions of her own. And then there's Gavin, my younger brother, 4 years my junior, whom my parents treat as the sun that lights up their entire world. I don't know exactly when I realized I was the odd one out in the family. Perhaps it was when I was young, sitting at the dinner table, trying to talk about the painting I'd gotten an A for in art class, only to be interrupted by my father with a question for Gavin. "How was basketball practice today, son?" Or maybe it was when I stood in the backyard looking through the kitchen window, watching my mother stroke Gavin's hair and smile at him in a way she never did with me. Or perhaps it started even before I was old enough to understand from the day I was born. My father is superstitious, which is strange for a pragmatic man like him. He believes I'm the unlucky star of the family. This story has become a legend in our household, retold like a cautionary tale. When my mother was pregnant with me, my father's company was at its peak, with major contracts and money flowing like a river. But right after I was born, on a rainy October day in 1989, things started to go downhill. A major client pulled out. A shipment of faulty medical equipment led to lawsuits. My father lost half his fortune within 2 years. He called me a bad omen, though he never said it to my face. I overheard it in whispered conversations between him and my mother when they thought I was fast asleep upstairs. In contrast, when Gavin was born, like a miracle, my father's luck turned around. A lucrative contract with a chain of hospitals in Boston was signed the very month Gavin came into the world. The company expanded and money poured in again. My father called Gavin his lucky charm, and from then on he became the center of all attention. Gavin didn't have to try to be loved, he just had to exist. I remember one evening when I was about 8 years old, my father threw a lavish BBQ party in the backyard of our mansion. Wealthy neighbors, business partners, and even the mayor of Greenwich were there. I had spent the whole day preparing a wooden train model, something I'd made in shop class. I was excited to show it to my father, thinking he'd be proud. But he barely glanced at it, frowned, and then turned to pat Gavin on the shoulder, who was holding a basketball. "Look at my boy here," my father said to a business partner, his voice brimming with pride. "This kid's going to make the school basketball team, I bet." I stood there, train model in hand, feeling like I was dissolving into thin air. My mother wasn't much better. She wasn't as openly biased as my father, but her indifference hurt even more. When I fell off my bike and scraped my knees, she bandaged them hastily and told me not to make a fuss. But when Gavin had a mild cold, she took the day off work to cook chicken soup and sit by his side. I didn't envy Gavin, at least not at first. I just wanted to be seen, to be loved like he was. Growing up in that favoritism was like living in a house where every door was locked except one, reserved solely for Gavin. I learned to stay quiet, to hide my emotions. I became an excellent student, not because I loved learning, but because I thought if I was good enough, my parents would notice me. I topped my class, earned scholarships, joined the school debate team. But those achievements were like pebbles thrown into a lake, creating a few ripples before sinking into oblivion. Meanwhile, every time Gavin scored a basket in a game, my father would throw a lavish dinner to celebrate. I began to wonder if I really was the unlucky star. Was my existence truly making this family miserable? I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining a world where I hadn't been born. Maybe my father would smile more. Maybe my mother wouldn't always look so tired. But I couldn't disappear, so I chose to live quietly. I did everything my parents asked, even if it meant giving up my own dreams. When I was 12, my father decided I had to attend St. George's Academy, a prestigious private school in Greenwich with exorbitant tuition and students from wealthy families. I didn't like the school. The kids there were arrogant, and I felt out of place. But my father said, "This is where you need to study to become useful to the family." I nodded, swallowed my fear, and complied. At St. George's, I studied hard, not out of passion, but because I thought high grades would make my father notice me. I topped the class, won math awards, joined the debate team. But my father never attended award ceremonies. He was busy taking Gavin to basketball practice or signing new contracts. My mother sent flowers, but she never asked how I felt. When I was 16, my father decided I had to study business at Boston University, where he had gone. I wanted to study creative writing, to become a writer, to tell stories that would move people's hearts. But my father dismissed it. "Writing won't feed you," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Business is the only path. After you graduate, you'll join the family company." I looked into his eyes, wanting to say I had my own dreams, but I didn't dare. I nodded, burying my dream of writing deep in my heart. Boston University was the longest 4 years of my life. I studied business, worked on group projects, joined clubs to pad my resume, all to make my father proud. But I felt like I was living someone else's life. I secretly wrote short stories at night, submitting a few to magazines, but I didn't dare tell my parents. I graduated with honors, but my father didn't attend my graduation. He was busy taking Gavin to tour colleges. My mother sent a card that read, "Your parents are proud of you." I stared at it, wondering, are you really? After graduating, my father demanded I join Langford Medical Supplies in the project management department. I hated the job. My father's company was an alien world, manufacturing medical equipment, negotiating with hospitals, cutthroat competition. I wasn't passionate about it, but I thought if I did well, my father would see me. I worked 12-hour days, managed contracts, proposed process improvements. Once, at 26, I pitched a marketing plan for a new product, inspired by the stories I used to write to attract customers. "Dad, this plan could boost sales," I said, sliding the proposal across his desk. He glanced at it, then pushed it back. "What do you know about real business, Brett?" he said coldly. "Gavin will join the company after he graduates. He's got natural instincts." I stood there, my heart shattering. Gavin hadn't even finished college, and he didn't care about medical equipment. But to my father, Gavin was always the only choice. I swallowed the pain and kept working. I thought if I tried harder, my father would see me. But all my efforts were futile. My father praised Gavin for trivial things, like attending a business seminar, while my plans were ignored. My mother didn't ask if I was okay. She was busy planning Gavin's extravagant birthday party. The favoritism didn't just come from my parents. It seeped into how our family was perceived in Greenwich. People knew the Langfords as Edward's family with his golden boy, Gavin. I was Gavin's older brother, invisible in their eyes. When Gavin was accepted into New York University for business, the whole town buzzed. "That Langford kid is going to make it big," I overheard a neighbor say at the golf club. I stood there holding a plate of salad, wondering if I even existed. I started doubting myself again. After all that effort, all those sacrifices, was I still just the unlucky star of the Langford family? I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was that I was still existing in a world where my parents and everyone else seemed to wish I hadn't been born. When I was 27, my father made the biggest demand of my life. It was a request I couldn't accept. For the first time, I defied his plans, and I never expected that decision would change my life forever. That day when my father called me to his office in downtown Greenwich, Connecticut to discuss something important for the family, I felt a storm brewing. The headquarters of Langford Medical Supplies was a sleek glass building with polished wood interiors and the luxurious scent of leather. My father, Edward Langford, sat behind his desk, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp as knives. "Sit down, Brett," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. I obeyed, my heart pounding, feeling like a schoolboy summoned to the principal's office, even though I was 27 years old. "Brett, the company is at a critical juncture," my father began, his voice steady but commanding. "Sterling Healthcare is our biggest client. We need to secure our relationship with them, and you're going to help the family do that." I nodded, expecting a familiar task, perhaps managing a new contract or presenting to a partner. I'd done these things hundreds of times, always trying to prove my worth to my father, even though he never acknowledged it. But his next words made my blood run cold. "You're going to marry Abigail Sterling, the daughter of Sterling's CEO. She's the key to securing a long-term contract." I blinked, my mind blank. Abigail? I'd met her a few times at company events, blonde hair, polite smile, always dressed in expensive designer dresses. She was kind, but I knew nothing about her beyond superficial greetings. Marriage? The idea felt like a boulder crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Dad, I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "Marry Abigail? Why do I have to do that?" My father frowned as if I'd asked a stupid question. "Don't play dumb, Brett. This isn't about love or some romantic nonsense. It's about the family, the company, our legacy. Abigail is your chance to actually contribute something instead of messing things up like you always do." His words cut like a knife, stirring memories of all the times I'd pitched ideas for the company, only to have them dismissed or credited to Gavin, my younger brother, the family's lucky charm. I had sacrificed so much to please my father, giving up my dream of writing, studying business I didn't care for, working at the company despite his lack of pride in me. But marriage was different. It was my heart, my future. I thought of the love stories I wrote in secret about people finding each other against all odds. I couldn't imagine a life without love, not after everything I'd already given up. "Dad, I can't do that," I said, my voice soft but resolute. For the first time in my life, I dared to say no to my father. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My father stared at me, his expression shifting from surprise to fury. "What did you say?" he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk, making his water glass tremble. "You think you have a choice, Brett? You think this family needs you for anything?" His words pierced my heart, but I didn't bow my head as I always had. A fire ignited in my chest, fueled by years of being overlooked, compared to Gavin called a bad omen. "I've done everything you've ever asked," I said, my voice shaking but not weak. "I went to the school you chose, took the job you wanted, lived the life you mapped out. But I'm not your property. I can't marry someone I don't love." My father let out a cold, mocking laugh, sharp as a blade cutting through the air. "Not my property? You're nothing, Brett. You're the one who brought bad luck to this family the day you were born. If it weren't for you, my company wouldn't have nearly gone bankrupt. Gavin is the one who brought us luck, not you." His words hit like a punch, but I didn't let them drag me down. I stood up, fists clenched, looking him straight in the eye. "If you think I'm useless, then let me go. I don't need this family to survive." My father glared at me, his eyes burning with rage. "You want to leave? Fine. As of today, you're no longer an employee of Langford Medical Supplies. You get no benefits from this family. The house you're living in? It's company property and I'm taking it back. The car you drive? Also company property. You want freedom? Go out there, start from nothing, and don't ever come back begging." I stood frozen, my mind reeling. I knew my father was angry, but I hadn't expected him to go this far. Fire me? Take everything? I had a few $100s in my wallet and a savings account with a couple thousand, not enough to last more than a few weeks in Greenwich, where everything was exorbitantly expensive. but I didn't beg for forgiveness. I turned and walked out of the office, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet, but for the first time, I also felt a spark of freedom. The next day, I received an email from HR. My employment contract was officially terminated. My company bank account was frozen, and the car I used was repossessed immediately. I stood on a Greenwich street, a small bag with a few clothes and my handwritten notebooks, unsure of where to go. I had nothing. No job, no money, no family. But I had my dream of writing, the one thing no one could take away. I found a job as a waiter at a small diner in Greenwich, serving working-class customers far removed from the elite circles my family mingled with. The pay was meager, barely enough to rent a shabby shared room with two strangers, but I didn't complain. I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop and started writing. I submitted short stories and articles to every magazine and publisher, dreaming of the day my name would appear on a book cover. I imagined my stories touching readers' hearts, making them feel less alone, the way writing had saved me. But reality was harsher than I'd expected. Magazines rejected my submissions, often with curt notes, "Thank you, but it's not a fit." I worked as a waiter by day, wrote at night, slept a few hours, but each rejection felt like a punch. I began to wonder, was my father right? Was I truly a bad omen, incapable of succeeding at anything? I looked at my handwritten notebooks, questioning whether they were worth sacrificing everything for. One evening, I got a call from my mother. I thought she was calling to make peace, to say my father had overreacted. But her voice was cold, distant. "Brett, how could you do this to your father?" she said. "You know how important the company is to our family. Abigail was your chance to make things right, but you've ruined everything." "Make things right?" I asked, my voice choking. "Mom, I've done everything Dad wanted my whole life. I just want to live for myself, just once." She was silent for a moment, then said, "You always mess things up, Brett. Gavin would never disappoint us like this." She hung up, leaving me with the long beep of the disconnected call. I sat there, staring at my laptop screen with an unfinished story, feeling like the whole world had turned its back on me. While I struggled with my new life, my family continued to shine in Greenwich. I heard that Gavin married a wealthy woman, the daughter of a Manhattan real estate investment family. Their wedding was the town's biggest event that year, with flowers imported from the Netherlands and champagne flowing like a river. My parents proudly posted photos in the local paper praising Gavin as the perfect heir. No one mentioned me. It was as if I'd been erased from the Langford family. I tried not to let the pain consume me. I joined a writing group in Greenwich where aspiring writers gathered to share their work. There I met Clara, a freelance journalist with curly, messy hair and a warm smile. She read my short stories and said, "Brett, you have talent. Don't give up." Her praise was the first light I saw in the darkness. Clara introduced me to an editor at a local magazine, and after many revisions, I published my first article, a piece about the invisible workers in Greenwich, the people who kept the town running behind its glamorous facade. I held the magazine, seeing my name in print, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I existed. But that small success wasn't enough to live on. I took a second job delivering packages at night, driving through Greenwich's streets, where the lights from lavish mansions stabbed at my heart. I wrote in the rare hours I had free, submitting to publishers, but rejections kept coming. I started writing a novel, pouring all my pain into it, about a man searching for meaning in a family that didn't need him. But the publishers called it too dark, not commercial. And I fell back into a spiral of doubt. I sat in front of my laptop staring at the pile of rejection emails, wondering if my father was right when he called me a bad omen. But then I remembered the moment I stood before him, defying him for the first time. That spark of rebellion still burned, and I knew I had to keep going. A year passed, and I was still barely scraping by. I published a few more articles, but my dream of publishing a novel remained out of reach. One evening, while making a delivery, I saw Gavin standing outside a fancy restaurant in Greenwich. He was wearing an expensive suit, laughing with a group of friends. I stopped the car, watching him through the window, feeling like I was looking at a life I once belonged to. Then I walked away, continuing the unfinished work. One evening, during a break between delivery shifts, I scrolled through social media on my old phone. I saw writers sharing short stories, poems, and even novel chapters on platforms like Twitter and Instagram. They weren't waiting for publishers. They were finding readers on their own. I thought, why not try? I created an anonymous account under the pen name Shadow Scribe and posted my first short story, a tale about a boy growing up in his younger brother's shadow, struggling to break free from crushing expectations. I didn't expect much, just hoping someone would read it. The next morning, I was stunned to see the post had garnered hundreds of likes and shares. One comment read, "This story spoke for me. Keep writing." I posted more short stories, then chapters of my old novel revised to fit the social media format. Readers started following me, from a few dozen to hundreds, then thousands. They left long comments saying my stories made them cry, made them feel understood. For the first time, I felt I wasn't invisible. By the time I was 29, the Shadow Scribe account had taken off. One of my short stories went viral, shared by a well-known journalist, racking up millions of views. Readers called me #Shadow Scribe, sending messages about how my stories helped them overcome their pain. I was still waiting tables and delivering packages, but every night I wrote with a new purpose. Not just for myself, but for those who were listening. I learned to use social media, creating simple illustrations for my posts and engaging with readers to keep them connected. I continued to hone my craft, taking online courses in storytelling and personal branding to make my voice stronger. At 31, an unexpected email arrived from Horizon Press, an independent publisher in New York. They had read my novel on social media and wanted to collaborate on publishing it. I sat in front of my laptop reading the email 3 times, thinking it was a prank. But when I met the editor at a small cafe, they said, "Your story has life. We want to bring it to readers worldwide." I signed the contract, my heart pounding, feeling like the dream I'd had since I was a boy writing in the dark was finally coming true. My novel In the Shadow of Stars was published when I was 32. It told the story of a man finding strength in his wounds, about defiance and hope. The book wasn't a blockbuster, but it sold a few thousand copies and received positive reviews from readers and a few critics. A local Greenwich newspaper even interviewed me, calling me a rising star from the affluent town. I held the printed book, seeing my name on the cover, and for the first time I felt I wasn't a bad omen. I was Brett Langford, a writer. In 2023, at the age of 34, my life turned another page. I was now Brett Langford, a writer with some influence. My debut novel, In the Shadow of Stars, had sold over 10,000 copies. A modest number, but enough to make me proud. I no longer waited tables or delivered packages at night. I lived by my pen, by the stories I wrote, and for the first time in my life I felt I truly existed. I had moved out of the shabby shared room in Greenwich, renting a small but tidy apartment in the suburbs of New York, close enough to feel the city's pulse but far enough to maintain the quiet I needed for writing. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. I loved this place, not because it was luxurious, but because it was mine, paid for with the money I earned through my sweat and dreams. I had saved about $400,000, a sum I never thought I could achieve. Some came from book royalties, some from articles, short stories, and speaking engagements at literary events. I began to think about the future, not just writing, but a fuller life. I wanted to love, to start a family, to have someone by my side to share both sunny and rainy days. But then one morning, as I sat on the balcony sipping coffee and reviewing the manuscript for my new novel, my phone buzzed. A news alert popped up on the screen. Langford Medical Supplies declares bankruptcy after years of losses. I blinked, set the coffee cup down, and felt time stand still. My father's company, the empire he built, the one he poured all his hopes and pride into, had collapsed. I skimmed the article, each line dancing before my eyes. Langford Medical Supplies had been struggling for years, especially after losing the major contract with Sterling Healthcare, the deal my father once wanted me to save by marrying Abigail. Competitors had overtaken them, outdated technology and poor management had dragged the company into the abyss. My father, Edward Langford, was quoted in the article, his tone still resolute but laced with desperation. I could sense we did our best, but the market is unforgiving. I closed my phone and stared at the quiet street. A part of me wanted to feel vindicated. That company, that family, had once deemed me useless, had cast me out of their lives. Now they had lost everything while I stood on my own 2 feet. But I didn't feel joy. I only felt emptiness, as if a long chapter had closed without a happy ending. I thought I was done caring. My parents had chosen Gavin, turned their backs on me. I believed that to them I no longer existed, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I prepared for a speaking engagement at a New York book festival, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was Greenwich. I hesitated but answered. My mother's voice, Catherine, came through, frail and unfamiliar, as if she had aged a decade since we last spoke. "Brett, it's Mom," she said, her voice faltering. Are you doing okay?" I gripped the phone, my heart pounding. "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice trembling. "The company. It's gone bankrupt. Your father sold the mansion to pay off debts. We're in a small rented apartment now, but things are tough, Brett. I know you're doing well. You're a famous writer now, aren't you? I just wanted to talk to you." I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. Doing well? Famous writer? I didn't know where she got her information, but clearly she had heard about Shadow Scribe, about my book. I wanted to laugh bitterly, to ask why she was calling now. After 7 years of silence, after calling me the one who messed everything up. But I said nothing. I just listened. "Your father's under a lot of stress," she continued. "He didn't want me to call you, but I thought, your family, you could help us, couldn't you?" Her words stung like a needle, piercing an old wound. Family? I had done everything to be seen as family, but they only saw Gavin, only saw me as a tool. I wanted to refuse, to say I owed them nothing. But a part of me, the boy who once stood in the mansion's backyard, still longed to be loved, to be acknowledged. I sighed and said, "I'll think about it, Mom." A few days later, my father called. His voice was still sharp, but I detected a weariness beneath it. "Brett, your mother talked to you, didn't she?" He began, cutting to the chase. "I don't like begging, but things are difficult. I sold the mansion, but we're still in debt. There's an opportunity for you to do something useful for the family." I gripped the phone, feeling like I was back in his office 7 years ago when he demanded I marry Abigail. "What opportunity, Dad?" I asked, my voice low. "I know of a penthouse in downtown Greenwich," he said. "The owner's selling it urgently for $900,000. A steal for the market. You've got money, right? You're a big writer now. Buy the penthouse, give your mother and me a place to live. This is how you make amends." Make amends. The phrase hit like a knife. I wanted to scream into the phone, to ask what I had done to need to make amends my entire life, but I stayed silent, letting him continue. "It's a good opportunity," he said, his voice growing animated. "You could invest and the value will go up later, and your mother needs a decent place to live. She's not used to living in a rundown rented apartment like this." I closed my eyes, picturing my mother, the gentle but distant woman who never asked if I was okay when my father cast me out. I knew I owed them nothing, but I also knew I couldn't turn my back completely. Not because I wanted their love, but because I didn't want to become like them, cold, unfeeling. "I'll look into it," I said, then hung up. I lost sleep for nights, weighing the decision. $400,000 was everything I had. My sweat, my dreams, the future I built from nothing. Buying the penthouse meant borrowing $500,000 from the bank, a massive debt. I knew I didn't need that penthouse. I was content with my small apartment, its balcony, and the morning sunlight. But I thought of my mother, imagined her living in a cramped rented apartment, and my heart softened. I contacted the bank and applied for a loan. They approved it based on my book royalties and writing contracts, but I knew I'd have to work tirelessly to repay it. I signed the contract for the penthouse, a luxurious apartment in downtown Greenwich with large glass windows overlooking the town, gleaming wood floors, and a modern kitchen. At $900,000, as my father said, it was a bargain for Greenwich. But I didn't buy it for myself. I bought it so my parents would have a place to live, so they wouldn't face destitution. I told my mother they could stay there for free, that I'd cover the monthly loan payments. I stayed in my small apartment, living modestly as before. When I handed the keys to my mother, she hugged me the first time in years. "Thank you, Brett," she said, her eyes glistening. I smiled, but my heart felt empty. I didn't feel loved, only that I had done something right, even if it left me exhausted. A few months later, as my parents settled into the penthouse, my father called. I was in my apartment, editing the manuscript for my second novel. His voice over the phone was softer than usual, almost friendly. "Brett, I want to thank you for the penthouse," he said. "Your mother's happy. It's a good place." I nodded, though he couldn't see. "I'm glad you and Mom like it," I said quietly. We talked for a few minutes, mostly about the penthouse, about what I was writing. He didn't ask much, but I sensed a hint of interest, or at least, I wanted to believe it was there. As the call ended, I heard him say, "Goodbye, Brett," and I prepared to hang up. For a moment, I felt I had some worth to my parents. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally acknowledged me, seen me. But then a faint rustling sound came through, like he hadn't put the phone down. I paused, about to hang up, but curiosity made me hold on. And then I heard my father's voice, not speaking to me, but to someone else, perhaps a new neighbor. "That Brett, such an ungrateful son," he said, his tone bitter. "He only bought this penthouse to act superior, to make me indebted to him. But if it weren't for him, my company wouldn't have collapsed. From the day he was born, he's been a bad omen for this family. Honestly, I wish he'd never been born." As he finished, I heard a hearty laugh, likely the neighbors. My heart stopped. I gripped the phone, my breath catching. I wanted to hang up, to erase those words from my mind, but I couldn't. I kept listening, as if I wanted to hurt myself more. "Gavin, my youngest. That's my pride," my father continued, his voice warming as he mentioned my brother. "He did everything right. Married into a good family, built a future. If I'd only had Gavin, things would have been different." The neighbor's laugh rang out again, agreeing with him. I ended the call and sat motionless in front of my laptop, tears streaming down my face. I had sacrificed everything, my dreams, my money, my future, to help my parents, to prove I wasn't a bad omen. But to them, I was still the outsider, the stain on the Langford family. I came to a painful realization. My parents would never change. They would never see me, never love me the way they loved Gavin. I had spent my entire life chasing something that didn't exist, their approval. And now at 34, all my efforts to mend our relationship had once again crumbled into dust. My father's words over the phone, cutting like a knife, echoed in my mind. "That Brett, such an ungrateful son. If it weren't for him, my company wouldn't have collapsed." I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, watching the city lights flicker, feeling like the world was shrinking, leaving only me in a nameless pain. I had sacrificed so much. $400,000 in savings, $500,000 in bank loans, sleepless nights to repay the debt, all to buy the penthouse for my parents, to give them a decent place to live after their company went bankrupt. I thought it was a way to prove I wasn't a bad omen, that I could be a good son. But now I understood. Nothing I did would ever be enough to change how they saw me. I was tired of trying, tired of chasing a dream that would never come true. I wanted to live for myself, not for their expectations or the guilt they imposed on me. The next morning I called Clara, my closest friend, the only person who truly understood me. We met at our usual cafe in Greenwich, where soft light filtered through the glass windows, illuminating the worn wooden tables. Clara sat across from me, her curly hair tied back, her warm brown eyes looking at me with concern. "Brett, are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of care. I told her everything, about my father's call, the words he said to the neighbor, how I felt erased from the Langford family for a second time. Clara listened without interrupting, holding my hand when my voice broke. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "Brett, you can't keep letting them drag you down. You've done more than enough. You deserve to live your own life." Her words were like a ray of light piercing the fog in my mind. I knew she was right. I had spent my life trying to please my parents, trying to prove I wasn't the unlucky star. But now I wanted to break free from that shadow. I wanted freedom. "I think you should sell the penthouse," Clara said, her voice firm. "It's not just about money. It's the chain tying you to them. If you want to truly live for yourself, you have to cut it." I looked at Clara, feeling like a door had just opened. Selling the penthouse. The idea made my heart race. It was a huge decision, not just financially but emotionally. That apartment symbolized my sacrifice, but also a reminder that I was still trapped in my family's cycle. If I sold it, I would sever my financial responsibility to my parents, release the pressure they put on me. I would be free. I nodded, feeling like I had found a new path. "You're right," I said. "I'll sell it." That same day, I contacted a real estate agency in Greenwich. The agent, a middle-aged woman named Susan, came to inspect the penthouse and marveled at the large glass windows overlooking the town and the luxurious interiors. "This place will sell fast," she said, jotting notes on her tablet. "The Greenwich market is hot, and at $950,000 it'll attract plenty of buyers." I nodded, but my mind was focused on paying off the bank loan and shedding the burden. Susan suggested listing the apartment the following week, and I agreed. I didn't tell my parents. I knew they would object, call me ungrateful, but I no longer cared. I wanted to live for myself, not for their accusations. While waiting, I kept writing. My second novel, tentatively titled Out of the Dark, was nearly finished. It told the story of a man finding light in his wounds, a narrative that mirrored my own journey. Every night I sat at my laptop typing words, letting my pain flow through each sentence. Writing wasn't just a job, it was how I healed, how I reminded myself I wasn't invisible. My shadow scribe readers remained loyal, leaving heartfelt comments under every post. "Your story reminds me I'm not alone," one wrote. "Keep going, shadow scribe, we need you." Those words were fuel, helping me stand firm amid the emotional storm. 3 weeks later, Susan called with good news. A young couple from Manhattan wanted to buy the penthouse for $980,000 above the asking price. I agreed immediately. The money was enough to pay off the $500,000 loan and leave a substantial surplus. I felt a wave of relief, as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest. But that joy didn't last. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my father's number. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but answered. His voice came through, sharp and furious, just like the day he fired me from the company 7 years ago. "Brett, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, skipping any greeting. "I heard you're selling the penthouse? The place your mother and I are living in?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Yes, Dad," I said evenly. "I've found a buyer. I'm going to pay off the bank loan." "Pay off the loan?" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "You think you can kick your mother and me out onto the street after everything we've done for you? You're an ungrateful son, Brett. You always have been." His words cut like a knife, but I no longer trembled as I once did. I had heard these accusations too many times. Ungrateful, bad omen, useless. But this time I didn't let them pull me under. I gripped the phone, feeling the fire of defiance flare in my chest. "Dad, I've done everything I could," I said, my voice low but resolute. "I put in $400,000, borrowed $500,000 to buy that penthouse for you and Mom. I sacrificed my dreams, my time, my energy, but it's never enough for you. You should ask the son you're proud of, Gavin. I'm not your property, and I have the right to decide my future." The line went silent, as if my father was stunned by my response. Then he let out a cold, mocking laugh, sharp as ice. "Who do you think you are, Brett? Some famous writer? You're nothing. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even exist. You owe this family." I closed my eyes, picturing my father in his office 7 years ago, his piercing gaze, his commanding voice. But I was no longer the frightened boy. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I've paid enough. That penthouse is mine, bought with my money. I'm selling it, and you and Mom will have to find somewhere else to live. I'm done trying to please you." I hung up, my hands shaking. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from freedom. For the first time, I felt I had truly broken free from the shadow of the Langford family. A few hours later, my mother called. Her voice was frail, almost pleading. "Brett, how could you do this to us?" she said. "Your father's furious. We have nowhere to go. You're our son. You can't abandon your family." I listened, but the guilt I once felt was gone. "Mom, I've done everything I could," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "I gave you and Dad a place to live, but I can't keep living for the family's expectations. I need to live for myself." She fell silent, then hung up. I knew she wouldn't understand, but I no longer sought their understanding. I had spent my life trying, and now I chose myself. The penthouse sold within 2 weeks. I paid off the bank loan with over $400,000 left. I kept some to invest in my writing, an editing course, a new laptop, a trip to Maine for novel inspiration. The rest went into savings as I thought of a future with Clara, a small house and children running in the yard. My parents moved out of the penthouse on the handover day. I didn't know where they went, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to know. My second novel, Out of the Dark, was published when I was 35. It didn't sell as well as In the Shadow of Stars, but it received glowing reviews from readers. "This story is a reminder that we can find light even in the darkest days," one critic wrote. I read those words, smiled, and felt I had found my own light. Clara and I started dating officially. She became the first to read my drafts, the one who sat with me on nights I doubted myself, the one who reminded me I didn't need my parents' approval to be happy. One evening, as we sat on my apartment's balcony, she said, "Brett, you're a writer, but more than that, you're the strongest man I've ever known. You stood up on your own, and I'm proud of you." Her words warmed my heart. I held her hand, feeling like I had finally found a true family, not one of blood, but of people who loved me for who I was. I still wrote as Shadow Scribe, but I was no longer anonymous. I began sharing my real name in posts and talks. I spoke about my journey, about a boy growing up in his brother's shadow, about a man finding strength in his wounds. Readers loved that authenticity, and my account grew to over 200,000 followers. I stood on the balcony of my small apartment in the suburbs of New York, watching the sunset paint the tree-lined street golden. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and a peace I never thought I'd find. At 35, I was no longer the boy Brett Langford standing in the backyard of the Greenwich mansion, yearning for a glance from my parents. Nor was I the young man grappling with guilt, trying to prove I wasn't a bad omen. I was Brett, a writer, a friend, a lover, and above all, myself. The penthouse had been sold. The bank loan was paid off, and the chain tying me to the Langford family had been severed. But the journey to truly escape their shadow wasn't just about money or property. It was about learning to put myself first, about building a life based on love and respect rather than duty or manipulation. And now, looking back, I realized that every pain, Every sacrifice had led me to this place, a place where I finally felt enough. In the months after selling the penthouse, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I sat at my laptop not to write novels or short stories, but to write for myself. I jotted down memories. The evenings when my father interrupted my stories to ask about Gavin. The times my mother bandaged my wounds without a word, and the moment I overheard my father call me ungrateful over the phone. Those words were like puzzle pieces, helping me understand why I had spent my life chasing their approval. I once thought forgiveness meant erasing all the hurt, returning to being the dutiful son of the Langford family. But I learned a different lesson. Forgiveness isn't forgetting or reconciling. Forgiveness is letting go of the weight of resentment so it no longer controls me. I forgave my parents not because they deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry that pain anymore. I forgave, but I didn't call, didn't write, didn't try to reconnect. I set a boundary, not to punish them, but to protect my mental health. I knew my parents were still living in the suburbs of Greenwich in a small apartment, relying on savings and Gavin's support. I no longer contacted them, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about it. I had done everything I could, given up dreams, sacrificed money, tried to please them. But they never saw me. And I realized, as painful as it was, I couldn't change them. I could only change how I faced them, and I chose to walk away. My life now felt lighter, not because I had wealth or fame, but because I had learned to live authentically. Clara and I were officially together, and every day with her was a reminder that love didn't have to be a battle. Clara saw me, not Shadow Scribe, not Gavin's brother, but Brett with all my scars and dreams. We talked about the future, about a small house in the suburbs, about trips to find inspiration for my stories and her articles. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she rested her head on my shoulder and said, "You know, Brett, I love how you always strive to be the best version of yourself." Her words warmed my heart. I held her hand, feeling like I had finally found a place to belong. Clara wasn't the only one. I had friends from the Greenwich writing group, readers who sent messages thanking me for stories that helped them through tough times, and strangers I met at book signings who shared their own stories of family and trauma. They were my new family, not based on blood, but on respect and love. My second novel, Out of the Dark, continued to resonate with readers. It wasn't a bestseller, but every letter from a reader, every comment on social media was proof I had touched someone's heart. I started writing my third book, a story about forgiveness and boundaries inspired by my own journey. I also launched a blog under my real name, where I shared not only short stories but also essays about overcoming toxic families and prioritizing oneself without feeling selfish. Those posts garnered thousands of reads, and I realized my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to millions struggling to find light in the darkness. One afternoon, I was invited to a literary conference in New York to speak about my writing journey and the power of storytelling. The conference room was packed with people, from young writers to loyal Shadow Scribe readers. I stood on the stage, lights shining in my face, but I wasn't afraid. I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I began by telling the story of young Brett, a boy who grew up in a family that didn't see him, who thought he was a bad omen because his father said so. I spoke about the years of struggle, the penthouse I bought to save my parents, and the moment I realized I couldn't live for their expectations. I shared how I learned to forgive but also to set boundaries, and how I found a true family, not in blood but in those who loved me for who I was. Family isn't just blood, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Family is the people who see you, respect you, and love you without demanding you sacrifice yourself. And if you're in a toxic family where you feel like you're not enough, I want you to know you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no. You have the right to prioritize yourself, and that's not selfish. It's necessary to live a full life. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. I looked out, seeing tearful faces, eyes that seemed to tell their own stories. After the talk, a young woman approached me, clutching a copy of Out of the Dark. "Thank you, Brett," she said, her voice choking. I haven't spoken to my mom in 2 years because she always made me feel worthless. But today I'm going to call her, not to reconcile, but to say I need space for myself. I smiled, my heart swelling. I hugged her and said, "You're so strong. Keep protecting your happiness, okay?" I returned to my apartment that night, sitting on the balcony with Clara. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, asking, "How was today, my writer?" I told her about the conference, the young woman, and the feeling that I was doing something bigger than myself. Clara smiled, kissing my cheek. "You're changing the world, Brett, one story at a time." I looked at the night sky, stars twinkling like tiny lanterns. I thought of my parents, of Gavin, of the years I lived in their shadow. I no longer resented them, no longer wished they'd change. I had forgiven, let go, and found my own light. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days I doubted myself, days the past tried to creep back. But I also knew I was strong enough to face them because I had Clara, my readers, and above all, myself. I opened my laptop, starting a new blog post. "If you're reading this," I typed, "and you feel unseen, unloved in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. You deserve happiness, a life where you're the protagonist. Setting boundaries isn't abandoning family, it's how you love yourself. And when you do, you'll find your true family, the ones who see you, love you, and walk with you through every storm." I hit publish, watching the post appear on the screen. I knew it would reach someone somewhere out there, just as my story had reached me. With a smile, I closed my eyes, feeling the cool breeze, knowing I had found home. Not in a Greenwich mansion, not in the Langford family, but in my own heart.